Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of the Petersen Automotive Museum Deep Dive Series. Today we're going to be talking about our 1886 Benz replica. What we have in front of us is a replica of the first automobile intended strictly to be driven and ridden in by people. Earlier horseless carriages were designed from carriages. They were built up from wood with wooden spokes. This was the first design from the ground up to transport people. So it's very automotive. It's got a metal frame chassis. It's actually tube frame. And it has spoke wheels, metal spoke wheels. It has solid tires, of course, because you wanted solid tires in 1886, keeping in mind that the roads were rutty and strewn with rocks and horseshoe nails. So they would puncture a pneumatic tire. So solid tires were a really good idea back then. And you can see how Benz approached this. He did away with everything that would tend to make you think it was a carriage that had been converted. In America, that's kind of what we were doing. We were taking carriages and using a lot of that technology and just applying a mode of power, electric, gasoline, steam. But Benz kind of had it going on because he thought, you know what, this thing is viable. I'm going to make one for people. I'm going to design it from the ground up. And he did a really, really good job considering it was his first car, his first time out. He applied all of the engineering that he knew to making this car viable. As I mentioned earlier, he began with the tube frame that stretches in a U shape around the front. And this is the kind of car that you sit on. You don't get into it, you get onto it. Because again, this is before bodies were built for cars. This is when the mechanism was out in the open for everybody to see. So you got in the car after you start it. Now starting the car was a fairly simple process. What you would want to do is prime the cylinder, make sure you had fuel in there. And if everything was set up right, if the spark was set up right, if your battery was on properly, you could come back and you could take the flywheel and give it a good hard spin. And if that didn't start, then you would try it again and keep trying until it did. It's a fascinating engine. And when we get a little bit later in the episode, I'll kind of go over it with you. As we can see, it's a chain drive with a lever that puts it into gear or takes it out of gear and applies the brake. There's one drum, and the drum acts on an external contracting brake, and its power mode going forward is on a leather strap that just relaxes for neutral. In other words, the mechanism is still spinning, the strap is just relaxed. And in order to tighten it, to give it the tension to go forward, you simply move the lever forward. Pull it back and it engages the brake. Pretty simple. It's like in a way, it's like driving a 1959 electric shopper, a kind of vehicle that was intended for handicap use in the day. You had one lever to worry about. But if you wanted to go even faster, this made you go forward, but you regulated your speed using this. And what this did, you turned it counterclockwise to let the air in the carburetor. There are holes drilled all around, and the farther you turn it, the more it pops out. And to slow it down or to stop it, you simply starve it for air. You clamp it down clockwise, and it's turned off. And to make sure it's turned off, or to turn it off by other means, there's this little key here that you turn, and what it does is it shorts out the electric system. So it cuts off and then you're stopped, hopefully when you want to be stopped. Now this car was full of detail invention, and again, you got to give Benz a lot of credit. Sure, there was a lot of old-fashioned to this car, but it's what he knew at the time. But it's how he took the technology that was available at the time and made it work. For example, it's a rack-and-pinion steering. Now this doesn't have a steering wheel, and it's probably superfluous to have a little point on here to point you where you're going because you can watch the wheel for yourself. But you can see the rack and the pinion. that engaged this wheel. And it's a three-wheeler because he didn't want to worry about the complication of making a four-wheel vehicle turn. That would come later. But for the time being, for his next couple of vehicles, he stuck with the three-wheel configuration. I think it's difficult enough for a lot of men to picture themselves in a car like this, driving on a lonely dirt road with wagon wheel ruts in it. But picture what it must have been like in the 1880s for a woman to drive this car. Karl Benz's wife drove a version of this car, a slightly more evolved version, on a multi-mile trip to visit relatives. She had more confidence in the car than Karl Benz did. He wasn't about to take this car out, but she said, you know what, I'm doing it. I'm getting in. And that's the kind of tenacity, that's the kind of strength, that's the kind of force of will that in a way gets things done. You do it because you want to do it, you're driven to do it. And Karl Benz built it, Bertha Benz drove it, and essentially proved its viability as a legitimate passenger-carrying, road-going vehicle. And you would also have to try to understand what it must have been like to get onto this vehicle wearing the kind of clothing that a woman would be wearing. She would be in high heels. She would have multiple layers of clothing on, petticoats and things like that. She would probably have had a jacket on. This is when you had to dress for the journey and not the destination, because what was happening outside was happening to you. There was no way of enclosing the vehicle, at least not for a while. Now, I think you could fairly say that Bertha Benz was about as ingenious as her husband was, because she encountered trouble. She encountered a problem with a mechanical system in the engine that was not pulling back when it should. So she got a pair of pantyhose, worked it so that it would form a kind of spring, and adapted it to fix the problem. And then she went off and finished her journey. She encountered a couple other things, but she must have been a woman of very, very unique character, because back in the 1880s, ladies just didn't do that. They were supposed to be in the kitchen taking care of things, taking care of the kids. And here's a woman in the late 1880s, early 1890s, not only driving a vehicle, but taking her child with it. That's the kind of confidence she had, not only in her husband, but in this emerging form of transportation. An 1886 Benz replica like this is really the perfect car to teach the theory behind an internal combustion engine, because literally everything is out and available for you to look at. And it's actually one of the very few vehicles that you could easily confuse the gas tank, the carburetor, and the radiator. They're all metal drums about the same size. Now keep in mind that I said gasoline, but really the fuel for this car was benzene. It was a less refined version of petroleum that was used more frequently in the time. In fact, in those days, gasoline was considered a waste byproduct. They a lot of times just would throw it out, but benzene was what they wanted. You can see the flywheel, and this is what you grab to spin it. And the reason that the flywheel is on a vertical axis instead of a horizontal axis is because Benz thought that the rotational motion of a flywheel spinning on a horizontal axis would throw off the balance of the vehicle, and he didn't want to do that. Later, he came to understand that really wasn't the case, but this is interesting because you can see the mechanism. And you can also see that Benz did not have to do this, but he made this pretty elegant. It's 5 spokes, but they're bent, they're nicely formed. There's really a sense of artistry in this car. And there's also artistry in the mechanism. You have bevel gear going from the camshaft to the crankshaft to motivate the vehicle. And this is the strap, the leather strap that would be engaged when you push the lever forward and you're sitting on the left and you push that lever forward. This is the strap you're engaging. Now, in those days, you didn't have gauges on your dashboard. In fact, you didn't even have a dashboard. So to monitor the mechanical systems, you had sight feeds that help you gauge how much oil your vehicle was getting. You didn't want to have it too much, you don't have it too little. You wanted it to drip just right. And you could do that by hand. You could adjust these easily by hand. And interestingly, the camshaft is out for everybody to see, and it's got a roller cam follower that engages and disengages the spark. It's really ingenious, and it's a testament to Benz's understanding of the internal combustion engine this early in its development that he was able to get this work at all. And we're so fortunate that the original survives. It's in the Deutsches Museum in Munich, Germany. When Mercedes-Benz's 100th anniversary came around in 1986, they built 25 of these to celebrate. In fact, their apprentices built 25 to celebrate the anniversary. And a fellow in England built another 25. So there are only 50 of these around. And this is about the only kind of replica that we like, because the first one, there's so much at stake if something goes wrong, you really don't want to operate it. But yet, you can't help but want to experience for yourself the genius that was behind the development of this car. Thank you, everybody, for joining me on this edition of Petersen Automotive Deep Dives. We'll see you next time.